Today's guest is Diana Jarrar. She is the founder of Magic Dates, a better for you snack company that uses dates as a symbol of cultural connection. Our vision is to share about our rich MENA culture, its food, people, and wisdom. Welcome, Diana.
Thank you. I had a bit of a debate with some like founders in the food space of whether it's MENA or MENA. And then you just said MENA, and a lot of them were saying MENA, and it's like, oh, the debate continues.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know about this debate. What does that mean about me that I said MENA?
Nothing. It's just I think it's a new language and new terminology
Yeah,
that's not really very like obviously prevalent and popular. And so I think it just speaks to how little is known about the MENA/MENA region.
totally. And it is actually kind of funny because there's so many conversations that we want to have about that region, but I feel like so often we just get blocked around what we call it.
Yeah.
Because some people don't even like MENA or MENA, and they're like, let's use this term SWANA.
Yeah.
And that term is also then other people are like, well, we don't like that term,
Yeah.
so.
That region over there.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, far away where we don't know what's happening there.
Over there. You call it whatever you want. At the end of the day, when they say a rose by any other name, it's still a rose, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Well, I'm so happy to have you here. And I like to start out my podcast by asking people how they know me and how we connected, because the podcast really highlights relationships and friendships. And I feel so blessed to have you in my life. It's been so enriching to have our friendship grow and deepen since we met.
Yeah.
But yeah, how did we meet?
I feel like when I met you, my heart was like, I know you. We've just known each other for so long. I feel like, on a soul level,
Yeah.
I really do feel that way. There was just such a familiarity, and such a depth in knowing like so early on. I connected with you through my friend Janan, and
Who we love.
Janan, shout out. And she and I were working on some campaigns for Magic Dates like during the holidays. So this was only a few months ago. And I somehow your topic came up because I think I saw a photo of the two of you. And I also remember seeing you after the show, after Rami, and kind of listening to what you had to say. And my husband and I were just like, so just enamored and interested in what your point of perception is. And so I kind of just brought him like, oh, I love her. I mentioned to Janan, and she's like, she's my friend. Like, I can introduce you. I'm like, really? I'm like, it's so weird to like see people online and then like be able to meet them. And you happen to be in LA. You sort of settled here recently.
Yeah.
Settled-ish.
Yeah. Never settled.
TBD.
Yeah.
And so she connected us, I think via text or WhatsApp or something. And then you and I just met up that Sunday, like 3 or 4 days later, right away. And we were supposed to meet up for brunch for like an hour, and then 5 hours later.
I know, we had our epic 5-hour brunch.
We were still there just talking about everything.
Yeah.
And time just flowed.
And we really did talk about everything, actually.
Yes, we'll talk about the rest now.
Yeah. And I remember when I met you, yeah, I just felt so moved by who you are as a person, first of all, but also your story. And yeah, I feel so much when I think of you, I think of so much like what's the word? I was gonna say preservation, but preservance, right?
Preserved fruits and vegetables.
Exactly.
Pickles.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought of pickles when I thought of you. No, but I just, I felt like, and especially, coming from our region, and especially being a woman and being a dedicated woman who's also wanting to be an entrepreneur and wanting to be successful and wanting to be in her femininity and, wanting to be of her tradition and of her culture, but not let, the trauma kind of take you down. And I feel like through your life journey, you really found this beautiful path for yourself that's so inspiring. So we'd love to just ask you, a little bit more to share about that, about where you come from, what's been your story. And
yeah. So I was born in Damascus, Syria. My mom is Syrian. My dad's Palestinian. His family, were refugees from Palestine in 48, and they went to Kuwait first, and then Lebanon, just moved around, just like a kind of traditional story that you hear, and eventually settled in Syria after the civil war in Lebanon. So then that's where my parents met. And I spent the first almost 12 years of my life in Damascus. So I definitely have not only childhood memories, but very much preserved memories of my time there and just of the relative peace. I mean, people can't imagine these days because I feel like they've only heard about Syria in the context of the civil war. And they always imagine that maybe things were percolating beforehand that like caused that. But in reality, it was a very peaceful existence aside from all the, you know, like local politics and like dictatorship and all that like BS that definitely exists, you know, in every probably country in the Middle East. Regardless, it was just a very, you know, kind of warm and like happy place. And my family and I immigrated to Canada together, to Toronto, because after all, just being in a region where we felt limited by economic opportunities, or my parents felt that way, and also for the sake of our education, in order for us to be in good schools, both my brothers and I, private schools are so expensive, and you know, in Syria, the school that I was in, you know, particularly through basically 5th grade when I was living there. And so they just realized that if they're going to give the same opportunities to my brothers, it was just not feasible. And Canada kind of came to be as an idea, and we immigrated to Toronto in 1997. And I was there for a few years, maybe about 7 or 8 years. So basically my like middle school, high school, like teenage years I'd spent there. And I would say that was probably like the happiest time of our lives for like my entire family. My brothers grew up there, and even it's kind of interesting. My brothers are younger than me. They were 5 and 7 when we moved to Canada, but still somehow speak fluent Arabic. So I'm really kind of grateful that they were able to preserve their, you know, culture and roots through like language. I feel like language and food are such strong preservers of, you know, our origins. And then I had a little stint in Saudi Arabia because my dad had moved there for work, and then he wanted me and my family, like my mom and my brothers, to move there with him once I was finished with high school. And it was a really challenging year because I felt like my soul just always wanted to burst in freedom, just like ever since I was a child. And then Saudi Arabia is the place to, you know, quell that, kill that. I know it's changing now. But at the time it was definitely very challenging, like, you know, to be there and have so many freedoms be limited, and just like movement, just like mobility. I mean, just like the very basic freedoms that we take for granted here. So I didn't last very long. I moved here when I was 19, and at the time I had like a family friend who I'd been like I had a crush on, this like, you know, family friend since I was a kid, and he would like visit us in Syria all the time. He was living in the US at the time, and he would come for my birthdays, not for my birthdays, but my birthdays in the summer. And he happened to be, you know, in LA now. That's where he and his family just had settled a long time ago. And so I came to like be with him here, and that's what brought me to LA, and just have been here ever since.
And you came out here alone?
Yes, I came out here on my own, and I mean, it was like no thought, you know, when you just want your like freedom. I feel like as a woman, or as any person who's just like bursting with energy and wanting to explore not only life but like yourself, and just like you want all the unknown, there wasn't even a second thought. Like I feel like there was no fear. I can't even think of it. And I mean, I'm afraid of a lot of things, but at the time there was no fear. There was just so much more excitement that overshadowed like any fear or like hesitation about that.
And I feel like when you first told me your story, what I felt was that you were so guided by your own intuition, your own inner knowing, you know, from whatever circumstances you were in. There was a way in which there was this inner voice, or even you could say this divine voice that was like pulling you. So maybe that's part of the no fear. But yeah, I'm curious if that's something that you feel like you've always had, or it kind of came upon you, or something you cultivated and developed, or
I feel like it was a very natural thing. My husband and I joke about that because we met maybe 12 years ago, and I was always like very just trusting in that, in like the path. And I actually lost that a little bit, and I'm trying to regain that more so. And I have like moments of that. And I would say overall, that's still the space that I live in. However, when things become challenging, it's really hard to stay in that space. Whereas back then, I think I just had less self-awareness actually. So I think it was more that it was like less self-awareness. And so I wasn't even aware of, maybe there was fear there that I wasn't even, you know, aware of, but I was like so focused on what I wanted to get and do, and like the end result of like wanting to leave and like have that, or like experience that freedom, that I didn't allow anything else to come in. So I think it's interesting that you say maybe it was an inner like listening. I think there was also some inner voice that maybe could have told me to be afraid, but I like shut that part down.
Yeah.
And so it's sometimes hard to distinguish between like fear and intuition.
Mm.
And so at the time I shut something down. So I don't know if it was intuition or fear. It was probably fear, because I feel like things transpired in a way that are like positive and I'm like grateful for. And I just like to reclaim a little bit of that. It's almost like a naivety. I don't know. And it's like, and I don't say it in like a negative way. I feel like there's a certain naivety that's like a childlike desire to just to like trust and like play. And I feel like that puts you in this like good vibration that then somehow attracts those things in a way, not getting overly analytical and like overly thinking about things. Often our mind creates problems, and it can't be also the mind that like fixes those problems. It's just like this like rumination. So that's a very long-winded way.
Definitely. I know. I love that, because I think there is such a, this, we're constantly battling between our fear and our intuition and what we truly want. And are we clouded by fear? And, like I definitely, growing up in Jerusalem, feel like everyone around me was so scared all the time. And like, fine, sometimes there's reasons to be scared 100%, but just the culture of fear was so strong. And I think for me, so much of my process was like, I don't want to be that way. I don't want fear to rule my heart. I don't want fear to rule my life. I know that there's something greater for me beyond this just trapped in fear mindset. And that has to start with this connection to yourself, because where else are you going to find it if not from the inside? And I think that's why I connected so much to you, because I feel like I really saw that parallel, especially, kind of being a younger child and being like, I know in my bones that there's something greater meant for me than perhaps my current reality.
Yeah, and feeling limited by that current reality, like recognizing. I think that's the biggest thing, is maybe you don't know exactly where you want to go, but just knowing that it's not here.
Yeah.
Or it's not entirely here. I think sometimes we need to go far away to come back to a certain space that is home. It's not to say there's anything wrong with like what home is, whether it's a place or an internal space or an environment, whatever that might be. But I found myself for like, years, I would say like a couple decades, just like searching in essence, and then finding the things I desired and allowing that to come into my life, but then also going back to some rootedness that was always there at the same time. And it tends to be culture, family, community. And not to say culture in a limiting way, not to say that it's like just my Syrian culture or just like having grown up Muslim, or it's not that. It's just whatever it is to you, whatever that experience was. It's just maybe the home, even like your immediate home, family, things that bring you comfort. But then we also don't want to get stuck in that space too much. There's so much paradox.
Yeah,
and that's
definitely.
what it all is. I feel like I'm always fighting the paradox.
Yeah, the living in this between, which I always talk about how that's the heart of mysticism, is learning how to hold the both and, because we're always trying to do or this or that, this thing is right and that thing's wrong, but what if it was just like both and this thing and that thing, and shifting from the or to the and is actually quite the spiritual process.
Yeah, and the but, there's always like, the but and the and are such like powerful words.
Yeah,
I took improv classes a few years ago, and there's a concept called yes and in improv, and it's actually how you collaborate with your like co-creators, because like on stage, like with the actors, because you don't have anything prepared. And the concept that allows for the co-creation is that yes and concept. So for example, you go up there and then you're acting like it's like a crime scene. So now I come up and I have to yes and you by adding to that scene, rather than negating the reality you just created, in order for us to actually create something that's believable.
Imagine if we did that politically.
Yes, and I think it's just what we do is but. So the converse, I think, of the yes and is the but.
Yeah.
But, and like that, like the whataboutism type thing, where it's like there's always like this like combativeness, and we all do it. Like it's not, nobody's absolved of this like egotistical need to like prove oneself. But I think the courage really comes into play when you allow yourself to put that aside and say, okay, like what am I not wanting to listen to and like hear?
Yeah, I love that. And I want to come back to this question of home, because obviously that is such a deep question in so many ways, but you've lived in so many places, and you've also traveled a lot, meeting so many different people, different experiences. But I'm also just like struck, yeah, being Palestinian, being from Damascus, Lebanon, which, is also part of the journey, and like Saudi, Toronto, LA, like, how do you think of home? Is there like one particular home that feels like the most home, or how do you, yeah, I mean, especially being a Palestinian in exile, like, I mean, yeah, I just would love to hear a little bit more of how you think of this question of home.
It sounded like a Drake song. Like Toronto, LA. Like I'm in a Drake rap song. That's really interesting. And I've thought about that a lot. I feel like I've always thought that home is where you've been the longest. And I think maybe Toronto felt like home for a long time. I think Toronto still feels like home. I think it's where I had the most positive feelings. That's what it feels like to me, is like what feeling comes up when you think about a place. And it's either this like lightness, or it's like maybe a darkness, or maybe just like vagueness. And Toronto just always feels like a lightness, like a comfortable, and that's where my family still lives.
Yeah.
My mom, my brothers live there. So when I visit home, they're there. So it's also like in the language. However, I've also been here in LA for almost 20 years. And I've created a home here because of, I think, like the love that I've cultivated also with like a newfound community, that it's not just a community that I'm born into, whether it's like, family, like bloodline or cultural, but it's like the ones that I've chosen and attracted, maybe not cognitively chosen, in certain respects, but attracted, but also just having like the love here.
Yeah.
So I feel like just anywhere my husband and I are together, like, is ultimately home, because now we're creating that new space for our like future, family, and just like how we're gonna, our expansion and whatnot. So I think it's both. It's really honestly hard to choose whether it's Toronto or LA.
What about Palestine?
I've never lived there. I truly, I mean, even though I think you want me to say that that's home because it's a romantic like idea, and of course I advocate for my people all the time, and we've had these conversations a lot, and that's like why we've connected so much.
Yeah.
Obviously, just you being rooted in Jerusalem, being an Arab Jewish woman, and then me being, like Muslim Palestinian, yet we see eye to eye, and like that just takes the amount of courage that takes to be able to see eye to eye, particularly from your end. Yet Palestine does not necessarily feel like home to me. I've never lived there. I don't have roots there. But I think about my grandparents, and I wish I got more of their stories before they passed on, to really understand what their experience was like. And so I think I've been asked that question. It's like, if you were ever able to return, like right of return, would you? And it's like, I probably wouldn't. It's not for me. Like, it's not for me. It's a space for someone else. There have been people there that have been struggling and suffering and fighting for decades, and that's a home for them. So I feel like my family made a choice, to leave, and we're very fortunate to like have a home somewhere else, and I don't want to claim someone else's home. Yeah.
Wow. And yeah, I think we talk a lot about Palestine and Jewishness, and I think I was also, especially being an Arab Jewish woman and meeting different Arab Muslim women, it's like sometimes they're very put off guard by hearing about Arab Jewish perspectives, but I feel like you were so open and welcoming and wanting and desiring that, and also knowing stuff, and just hearing about your journey, especially around meeting Jewish people, being in Jewish community. I'm curious if you could share a little bit about that, about what that was like. I mean, we always joke that you have more in LA. You have more Jewish friends, and I have more Palestinian friends here.
In LA, we got to connect our communities.
But what was that like, like when you first started meeting Jews for the first time, or understanding, kind of crossing that boundary that was been placed there?
I think initially for me, it wasn't contentious at all, just because I wasn't very politically inclined. And so it's like, yes, I was born into, a certain like heritage and culture. I just didn't necessarily engage in it as much as I like could have. And this is, I'm saying, like as a teenager, or like early 20s. And so things just kind of happened organically, because I live in a city where there are a lot of Jewish people, and it's just a very easy community to come across. And then it evolved into more of a curiosity because of course then you have personal experiences, you start building friendships, you like date people romantically, like different things happen where you become more curious about why there is such a divide. It's not a question I've ever had to ask myself before. I feel like sometimes you have to feel something in order to really care about it. And so it was never something that was really in my periphery to like feel. It hadn't impacted me on an emotional level up until actually, building friendships and like building relationships. And so that's, I think, when the curiosity flourished more and like kicked in. And the curiosity led me to embrace the culture more rather than like detest, or I don't even know how you like learn that. I can't even tell you like what that is. It's just I just have a natural curiosity. I'm so damn curious about like everything and just kind of like asking questions. Actually, my best friend and my husband joke around about that. It's like a million questions, but I'm just genuinely curious what people are up to. Not all the time. I also need like my downtime and I want to relax, but I'm just curious about people's perspectives. And like, we have this like one life to live and we make choices. And I'm just always questioning. And that was part of the reason why I seeked like so much freedom so early on as a child. So I think some of it has got to be hereditary. I think my dad is very curious. So some of it has got to be just innate. And I feel like this became the topic that one, as a Palestinian woman or a Jewish woman, that like one would be so curious about because of now like learning about the background, like everything. I've had to actually like learn things from the get-go because I didn't want to come into it with this bias that, well, just because I'm Palestinian I have to believe a certain thing and believe a certain way. And so the very first book I actually read about like the conflict was The Case for Israel.
I know. I
like,
remember when you said that to me, I was like, wow.
it was like the most biased book you can read on the other end.
Yeah.
And I was like, damn, Palestinians suck. This is crazy. I'm like, but this can't be entirely true. And now it's funny because the author is obviously like, he was like a defendant of like the state of Israel. He's like their lawyer for God's sake. And it's like, well, this is not the best book to start with. I even like told some of my Jewish friends, they're like, well, that's not really
Yeah,
a very
yeah.
unbiased book. I'm like, no, for sure. But that's where I started.
Yeah.
Just to the point that I want to understand where everyone is getting their information from, what they're feeling.
And I think it's so funny that that was the first book you read because it just also shows how much high tolerance you have for like examining,
Yeah.
what is true or what has been taught.
Yeah. And it's not that there's like one true thing. I mean, truly, I think the deeper you get into that rabbit hole, the more you realize, and that's the thing, is like all these activists on any side try to make it seem so black and white. Like, oh, this is a really simple issue. This is what it is. This, we were here first. This is what happened. This is what it is. And it's like, yeah, when you try to simplify things, some things can be simple, but this is not one of them. And the reason is emotion is always involved.
Yeah.
And also multiple truths exist. Like that's also true. So that's again back to the yes and like the both and. There absolutely are multiple realities happening at the same time because it is all subjective. There are different perspectives. And how do we reconcile all those things?
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to, do this thing of like, oh, this is a symmetrical conflict. It's not that at all. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying on an emotional level and also on a historical level, there are multiple truths. It's just who's going to be brave enough to like acknowledge some truths and kind of own up, to certain things. And I feel like the superior power, should be the one who's doing that first. Like it should never be the victim who's expected to like have the burden of like rising up and, being the courageous ones. Palestinians are in the present day like the inferior group.
Yeah.
From a power perspective.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it's a really hard thing because it's on the one hand, there is this lens around acknowledging the multiple truths, acknowledging trauma, acknowledging healing, all these different things. And there's also like, okay, a very intense political reality that has, very severe oppression of Palestinians. And it's like, it's just so hard because I think, especially in the activist justice space, sometimes the way to deal with, like really intense cycles of violence is to be like, no, we have to fight back. This is wrong. This is, which is 100% true. And it's also one of the things that's tricky about that is that we have to kind of work with people's experience and like what you said with their emotional process. Like there's no way to circumvent that.
Yeah.
And that's a very hard thing, like holding both, like, okay, what is justice and what is injustice, and how do we have clarity and understanding of that in a real way? And how do we also understand, well, how did we get here, and how do we understand people's process? And most people, yeah, are just coming from whatever conditioning that they're coming from. And that curiosity that you have, I feel like it's rare. I think that there aren't that, I think that's such a beautiful quality, and for me, that comes from being a spiritual seeker, when you're like, I want to know more about the world. I want to know more about the person that was deemed an enemy for me. Like what's going on there, even study the case of Israel just to know, which I think is still so funny.
And that's the beginning. A lot more came after that.
Yeah.
And like still does. Like it's still honestly a learning process, not necessarily, it's not going to change my perspective necessarily, but you get more nuance, and I think it builds empathy too. I mean, it's for both sides, and it's doesn't make me like less of a quote unquote like fighter for like Palestinian justice and like rights. However, there's empathy that is also necessary in the conversation, for the history of why this happened and like where Jews come from and the sovereignty that they very much deserved. I think there's just an acknowledgement that's necessary, where it's like, yes, we know what we maybe like the roots were cynical of like the founding of Israel, but it was just a necessary thing in essence. Like I feel like that's sometimes just an acknowledgement. Like when you fight with a friend and like you hit them in the face, you can't take that back. It's like if you broke their nose, you can't take that back. However, if you continue to double down on saying, well, I didn't do it or you deserved it or whatever, versus like, I'm sorry, you can't take it back. However, you acknowledged it.
Which is a first step in like a bigger truth and reconciliation process is, let's be honest about what happened.
Yeah, exactly. Just like being honest that that's what it was. Like we understand that the founding, of everything. And the thing is, whether people are willfully ignorant or truly ignorant, I don't know. Like I'm not entirely sure if people just truly have the wrong information. I don't think that's what it's like. It's out there.
Yeah.
Again, if you're curious and you want it, I mean, I'll list like 20 books right now that you can go through, like just the denial.
Yeah, give us a better recommendation than the case of Israel.
Yeah, I mean, I do not recommend the case of Israel, but I mean, there's like a whole book about like Palestinian history, like 4,000-year history, and how Palestinians did exist, like this narrative that like they didn't have their own cultural identity. I mean, maybe they didn't have their own national identity up until like relatively more recently, but you can't say that an entire people didn't exist. You're actually literally denying someone's like existence. How do you expect to have a conversation with people that don't exist? Apparently, like with a ghost.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I went a bit of a tangent.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I love the tangents.
But there's like back to the element of fear, because it's like when you say that like curiosity is like maybe rare. I think curiosity has to come from a place of relative peace. I mean, again, I'm definitely not at peace always, and I have like fear often about like different things, but just like recognizing that that's what's coming up, like recognizing that, well, I'm not listening to this narrative right now because I'm actually afraid.
Yeah.
And there are things to be afraid. There are very tangible things that like Jewish people are afraid of, and it's not imagined. It's not an imagined fear. There are things in history that obviously happened that created that, and that it's warranted. It's a warranted and validated fear. However, is it being projected in the wrong direction? Yeah. And the answer is yes.
Right, of course.
The answer is yes. And then now you have a situation that's like 75 years old that has almost become like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, where it's like, okay, well, now you're going to be afraid of each other because this conflict that these leaders told you existed for millennia, it didn't really exist for millennia. Like, sure, there was like always like tribal infighting. That shit always happens. It even happens amongst like Muslim communities. It happens everywhere.
Happens in your family.
It happens everywhere. I mean, that is, it's like not being human to say that communities are not going to try to like, take each other out when they feel threatened, and like the power is shifting or whatnot. So of course that happened, but it wasn't some like systemic thing. And again, I don't want to deny people's truths, because I also understand that Jews lived in the Middle East not as like equal, like citizens entirely. But like being like Muslim was also forced upon like Palestinians, because like Palestinians like come from like a Christian lineage. There are Palestinians that were Jews, and then some that converted to Islam. So I feel like there's like this convolution between like Islam and Palestine, where like Islam was also forced or brought, or whatever you want to call it, like onto Palestinians. So it's not like that's what caused the issue just for like Jewish people. Like Islamism was something that came to their region as almost like a political power, and it was everybody that was there that was impacted, whether you're Jewish or secular or whatever it was, or like pagan at the time, whatever it might have been. And so to like kind of pit these groups against each other, like Jewish and Muslim, it's like that's not really historically accurate.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like a lot of my Palestinian Muslim friends, will always be like, well, I know my ancestors were Jewish, because so it's just like so much of that shared lineage is just undeniable. So it's just, for me, at least, it feels really funny when we get into these conversations around making it about identity as opposed to making it about the power and the colonial oppressive regime and the way that functions. And, I think it's really harmful when we get into this place where like, well, Jews are this or Palestinians are this, or, because there's nothing intrinsic about that identity that makes you act a certain way. It's basically just conditions of reality. So how do we break away from this way of just talking about politics through the lens of identity and more talking about it through the lens of justice issues? And obviously identity is part of that, but like, I think that's kind of like this complicated playground.
And I think Jewish people more than anybody know how harmful that is, right? It's like historically just these like tropes that end up making the communities they live amongst like fearful, and like all the bullshit that was spread in order to like in essence scapegoat. I mean, that's really when you read history and figure out what's happening like within the Jewish community and wherever they were, that's what was happening. It was always a scapegoat. And
it is really hard moment to be in, where you just as a Jewish person, I feel like I can see that, and I obviously lived that Jewish history in so many ways, and especially as an Arab Jew. But then it's like you see how so much of that trauma is being transferred onto Palestinians, and then Palestinians almost have to have this very historical Jewish experience, and it's like, okay, well, when did that cycle stop, and why is all that trauma now being kind of dumped on Palestinians? And we're kind of in this. We got into that place,
but perceived that way, I guess. It's like you're articulating it that way. I would also probably articulate it that way, but that's not how a lot of people would see it. Like, what are you talking about? That's not what happened. There was a war. And we came and like we just won the war, and that Palestinians historically, Muslim Palestinians didn't want us to be there. They didn't want to share the land. And so then you have all these like narratives of like, well, that's actually what's true. What are you talking about? That's crazy. What does trauma have to do with it?
And it is interesting. I mean, I feel like we were kind of talking about this before, about that level of propaganda that is fed onto people, and people really just believe in that until they meet someone of a different identity that kind of questions it for them, and just that role of relationships and how important that is. Because I feel like for me, one of the things that I feel really lucky in is that I have such a diverse community. And I think that diversity is what allows me to think in clearer ways, and especially, in the MENA region, it's like, there's so many histories, and I'm all the time learning about different groups of people and different tribes. And I mean, even just within Palestine, but obviously within the whole region. And so much has been erased, so much has been lost. And to come out and just to say like, well, I know what's true because I read this book. It's not even kind of crazy.
I wish people would read a book and say, I know what's up. It's like they read like a post or forget Instagram. It was just like, where do people get their, when it's propaganda, it's like, where do people get their propaganda from?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. There must be some like source, because all of a sudden you kind of see like a group, there's like an enmeshment and there's like a group thing happening. And it's like everyone's clearly reading the same source. And there's like a unity. Obviously, there's like power and like numbers and like that unity. And I think that's also, a strategy
Yeah.
to like all think the same, because there's like a power in that. And I'm sure that gets people to a certain extent, like it gets you somewhere. However, in order to like transcend and actually be able to get past that point, you'd have to actually start like breaking that enmeshment and like kind of thinking for oneself and feeling safe enough to do that. And I think we have to like create space for one another. It's like, I can't expect you to feel safe if I didn't, not me personally, but like around you, like when you say amongst your community. And so you obviously have enough diversity around you, whether they're Palestinian, Muslim. I know you have such a beautiful community because you've invited me, many times into your gorgeous gatherings, and it just feels very supportive. And then you're actually able to like expand that energy rather than this like other energy. And that's something I was becoming afraid of, like even like personally for my own self. I wasn't in that community, and it wasn't until really I met you that I was able to like almost believe and like have hope again, because it's like, wow, it's such a single-minded narrative that I'm seeing, and I just felt so like alone. And especially when you have friends that have that narrative that are unwilling or whatever it might be, there's like there's never questions that are asked. It's always just like statements and like so much defensiveness, and it's like I just don't want to engage in that because it's so draining. Because it's like, if I'm gonna be in the world and trying to do like my thing and just bring something that's actually productive and beautiful into the world, I can't get stuck in that energy of like tit for tat and like just ego battles in essence. And so I'm grateful to continue to like harvest and like harness that energy, which is more loving. And I'm not saying it in a way that's like, oh, kumbaya, we're just like on the mountain and like being ignorant of reality. It's actually a very brave space to be in for anybody, because we see the reality and yet we still have hope. It's not that we're ignorant of the reality or like, we're not in tune with it. It's like, oh no, we like, I actually have no idea how anything would get solved. I really do not know. However, there's always this like optimism. And it's like that I try to maintain.
And it is, for me at least, it's kind of that embodiment of what it is that you want to see in the world. And we were speaking about the gatherings, and I just remember my Hanukkah party this year, which you were at. And I remember having this moment where I was like, wow, I think this is how my grandparents and my ancestors lived, around that multi-religiosity. And there was people, a lot of MENA people, but like from so many different identities and backgrounds, and having so many Muslim people there. It's like getting to share holidays and celebrations and to create that community where it can be safe. And we're not avoiding talking about politics, but we're not also allowing the trauma to suffocate our relationships. I feel like that's part of what I've been trying to create. And it's, obviously a lot of challenges, because there's a lot of trauma and there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of like, well, I don't know, for a lot of people, especially in LA, like especially in the Arab community, and their first Jewish friend, and and I think that was also something that was so interesting to me meeting you, because I was like, wow, like, yeah, you're so in Jewish community. I was a little bit shocked, honestly, because I was like, wow, like you have, because and there is a lot of Zionism in those spaces, and just that you are putting yourself in situations where some things are being said that are like really violent and really hurtful, and and just like, I don't know, honestly, it made me so sad. And I think that was a trend that I've kind of began to see. And hopefully I'll articulate this well, but because I feel like I've been in a lot of like anti-Zionist Jewish community for a while. But then one of the things that I realized is that there was a lot of, especially in the American anti-Zionist Jewish community, they weren't as connected to Palestinians. They didn't have as much relationships. But then when I would meet like Palestinians, they would actually who have relationship with Jews, the relationships that they had were like with very Zionist Jews. And I was like, wait, what's happening here? Like, so I think that's like, okay, well, how do we still acknowledge, like as you said before, the
Mhm.
political realities and come from that place of holding space for experience
Mhm.
and deepen into that relationship where it really can be safe.
Mhm.
And I know, like, yeah, I mean, this is kind of something that we talked about, I think, right before we started recording this podcast around dating and
Mhm.
relationships.
Mhm.
And I know you've dated Jewish men.
Mhm.
And we were talking just about how some people, like that healing that
Mhm.
can maybe happen in those spaces where
Yeah.
there is that trauma.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know if you want to share a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it can be a double-edged sword in a way where it's like, I think some healing can occur because you feel a sort of acceptance. Um, it's weird. It's like a validation from this one person because you feel like the entire conflict is like embodied
Yeah.
on this relationship.
It's a lot of pressure.
It's a lot, totally, yeah. And whether it's like, yeah, like a relationship, a friendship, like whatever that might be, it's like, oh wow, like it means, if we love each other, if we can harness this friendship, it means that like world peace is possible. And honestly, to a certain extent, I like do believe it.
Yeah.
I mean, I do, like, even, you're talking about like friendships that even are more like Zionist based. It's like, well, they're not Zionist based friendships. It's not like we talk about that necessarily, or that's not what it's like, what the substance is. However, they're people, and like being able to actually connect on the human level where it's like, wow, aside from that thing, we're like family,
Hmm.
you know? And so being able to connect like that, and then just trying to figure out what that switch is that takes you from having such an ideology that almost denies, like I felt like, like my existence was being denied because of that ideology, yet I felt accepted in so many other ways. So there's also this paradox like within that space.
Yeah.
Yet when you get together and you gather and you laugh and you just, have a beautiful time, and like again you build that like positive, positive energy. I'm going to sound so like just airy fairy. I don't really mean to just kind of stay in positive energy, but it's good feeling.
Yeah.
The embodiment that you were talking about earlier, that feels very hopeful.
Hmm.
Because it's like we don't actually have control over, in reality we're having these beautiful conversations and it's important. And is that really going to directly impact anything? I don't know, maybe on like a quantum mechanics level it might eventually. I do believe that those things are connected, however not in a practical way like immediately. And so I think the healing happens because again of that possibility, that you feel like there is hope and there is possibility, and it at least keeps the heart open.
Yeah.
And like conversations going, and there's always like potential. There's always potential.
Yeah. Which I think that is the most sacred thing we can do, is keep the heart open.
Mm-hmm.
And we have such beautiful, I'm just also struck that we are recording this podcast right when Ramadan is about to begin, and this year Ramadan and Passover are overlapping. The biggest holiday in Islam and the biggest holiday in Judaism are sharing time together.
Yeah.
And that multi-religious spirit, which, as you were saying, it's actually, there is so much acceptance there when there is that friendship and that relationship and that beauty. I actually, for that Hanukkah gathering, you got me this book, The 40 Rules of Love, which is all about Sufi love. And I absolutely loved it. And I remember when you gave it to me, I was like, this is a perfect Hanukkah gift. Because it just felt so alive. Yeah. It just felt really aligned. I was like, yeah, because when you're coming from that place where this is about devotion, this is about healing, this is about spirituality, this is about the heart being open, it makes sense that there's all these intersections, and then each religion is just beautified by the other one.
Yeah, and not being dogmatic about it, because it's like at the end of the day, if you really had to like break things down, it's like everything comes from something else. It's like, Islam, you could say we were either inspired by Judaism or we appropriated, depending on who you talk to. You'll hear different narratives, and that's fine. I mean, it's all acceptable. But then it's like, okay, but like Judaism also started from something else, where it's like it also borrowed certain concepts and ideas, and it's fine. That's the thing about like evolution and creativity, and just humans wanting to find meaning in life. I mean, that's what it is. Like I contemplate this question a lot, is like, does life innately have meaning, or do we apply meaning to it in order for us to like, is it a survival mechanism? And I mean, it probably is a survival mechanism, because I don't think the universe really has intention or like cares necessarily. It seems like it's
Yeah.
a benevolent process where for billions of years it's just been doing its thing, and then like we just got here, as humans, and so it just continues to do its thing. But then as humans, like, to survive, we had to create all these tools, and one of them was religion, to like create meaning and like have answers, so we're not just like these floating bodies like freaking out.
Yeah. We're not consumed by fear all the time.
Yeah, yet ironically it's also caused so much, like fear and like dogma. So I think just your spirit is so open to the spiritual aspect of what that is, of like, oh, okay, we're all looking for that connection to whatever you want to,
Mm.
call it, universe, God, creation. And there are different tools to do that. And some people don't even require tools. Like, I think for me, having grown up in a Muslim society, there's a lot there that I can appreciate. And at the same time, I can connect directly to my, creator, and like this like magic of the universe and how it came to be without excluding others. I mean, I can do that, a lot of people like can't, and you can do that. And I think that's why you accepted that book, about Sufi love, for as a Hanukkah gift, because you accepted like the intention of it and like the energy of it and like the more kind of global universal meaning of it.
Mhm. Yeah. I want to ask you about one of your biggest gifts and offerings to the world, which is magic dates.
Magic dates, my baby. Sorry, my neck is. I've been like staring at your beautiful face.
I know, I'm also getting. It's so beautiful to be here in your beautiful home. But yeah, you started this amazing company that is about, in that way, around sharing that hospitality and sharing that love through dates, through magic dates.
Yeah. Well, yes, I mean, dates are just such an I mean, I actually fell in love with dates even more after starting the company. It's just one of those things that, I mean, think of something you grew up with, you take it for granted. And
Yeah.
like dates is just another fruit. However, it's somehow not. I mean, just all the varieties, there are over 60 varieties of dates. You can't say that about bananas or apples or anything else.
Really? Apples? You can't say that?
Maybe 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, but like 60 varieties of dates.
Yeah, there's a lot.
It's incredible. And again, from our region, from like the MENA region, that's shared by like everybody, like nobody can appropriate the dates. This is not a Jewish, Muslim, or any next thing. It's just this like beautiful ancient crop that, I mean, they found fossils that are like 1 million years old of wild date palms growing. And then as humans, we domesticated them several thousand years ago in Mesopotamia. And it's just this beautiful sustenance that has been there for our people for thousands of years. Um, and then this palm tree came here to California, like just a little over 100 years ago, because of agricultural explorers. So I love that like poetic aspect of it as well, that it was like a fruit that migrated in a way, just like we all did, and then ended up thriving here because the environment was hospitable for it. And I just found it to be the perfect fruit to really symbolize what's possible and like the cultural connections that we can create, and also to like speak about our region where we come from, because there's so much wisdom, again, speaking about like Sufism and Judaism and Islam, Christianity. I mean, they all came from there. The poetry, the the science, the arts, it all started there. The beauty, the I mean, just so much gorgeousness that just gets lost in the narrative of politics, in this very like singular lens. I feel like here in the West, in the US, like specifically because we live here. So yeah, just sharing more about like my culture and using that as a tool to do that.
I love that. And dates are quite magical. It's true. I really think of dates as being also quite romantic also. There's something about them that's so,
Really?
yeah, I don't know. It's just, yeah.
So ritualistic. I think maybe that's what it is.
They're ritualistic. They're special. And actually, I have a healer who lives in California, and I gifted her some dates from Jerusalem one time. And she was like, okay, like I want to compare. She's an energy healer. So she wanted to compare the date from Jerusalem and the date from California.
Oh, yeah.
Because she can feel the stories of the people who were planting the dates. So she was like wanting to have an embodied reality around how the dates are carrying the stories differently.
Yeah.
And one of the things she said about the Jerusalem dates was just like, these, and I thought of you because this is so much of your branding. It's like they're so nutrition dense.
Yeah.
They're not meant as like a dessert, which maybe sometimes in the West people are like, oh, okay, a dessert. But they're actually, it's like you're hiking and you need a date and it fills you up. and you're out in the desert and you need sustenance because it was a hot day, and like there's something about the fullness of the nutrition. That's maybe why I think it's like, yeah, this poetic romantic thing, because it also comes from the desert, which is so sacred in so many ways, but where you're like you're needing nourishment, and here comes this like luscious, beautiful, full, rich date.
Well, and how amazing it is that like dates grow in an environment where like you do need that kind of nutrition. Like we didn't create that, humans didn't create that. It just, in this perfect creation, that you're in this, you know, desolate, dry, you know, space where you need electrolytes, and that's what dates has a lot of. Like it has more potassium than, you know, to kind of get like a little bit more like technical, but it has like twice as much or 50% more potassium than bananas do.
Oh wow.
And
damn, I'm really hating on bananas tonight.
I know, I love bananas though. I put them in my smoothie all the time, but I mean, there's like 3 kinds of bananas. I don't know. There's like little bananas and then brown bananas and then
It's
big
true,
bananas.
right, you're right.
I'm not a banana girl, okay? I'm the date girl. You got to get a banana girl on here to fight for the bananas. Oh my God. Yeah, so like absolutely the micronutrients, like the minerals that are in the dates, the sugar. You know, like sugar has become so vilified, but it's like the most fundamental macronutrient that we need, that our brain needs to like function. What's important is just like what packaging does it come in, and this date is just packaged so perfectly because it has the fibers and the micronutrients. And there's like this theory that fruits are sweet so that we would eat them so that we can get the nutrients that we need, you know, to give our bodies. So it's kind of like a way to like attract us to eat more of them,
seduce us maybe.
Yeah, seduce us with their sweet nectar.
I love that. And if people want to find out more about magic dates, or maybe how to order a date flight, which I love those date flights, I think they're so beautiful, how do they find out about it?
Yeah, we're online. You can't miss us. It's like magicdatespites.com. We're on Instagram as well. Magic Date Spites, TikTok, just everywhere. Just Google us and you'll find us.
Cool, amazing. I love that. Is there anything else we didn't get to in this podcast that you would like to share with me, share with our audience?
I feel like I would need another episode to get into things that we haven't potentially gotten into. I mean, I'm excited for our Shabbat iftar that we're planning, which is, I get so excited. Like when you told me that, I was like, wait, what? Because I feel like I've dreamt about this, like not this particular event, but just this idea of like co-creating, coexisting, co-sharing, and like accepting another culture. I love celebrating the rituals of your culture and your religion, and then like allowing that to be part of like iftar as well during Ramadan. I think is so sacred and special. So I'm really excited for that during Ramadan for us.
Yeah, same. I know. I think it's so special because it's the perfect thing, you know, Shabbat and iftar. It just makes sense. We're having dinner.
Around food.
Yeah.
That's the thing about, I mean, food for me, one of the first things I learned how to do when I moved to LA was cook. And it always felt like a really like low barrier way to connect with people. You can always find commonality over food.
And you're an amazing cook, so
I'm pretty decent.
I feel blessed to have gotten to eat a lot of your.
So nice. Thank you.
Yeah.
Because I love to eat. Honestly, it was mainly because I'm like, I need to be able to make all my mom's like Arabic dishes, because otherwise I'm gonna starve to death here. Because I can't eat like out all the time. It's because I love to eat, so I'm like, I have to be able to make these things.
Right.
So I feel like true chefs are always foodies.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So true.
Thank you for having me. It was such a nice chat.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me in your home. Thank you for feeding me dinner, which we're gonna have as our celebration. Yeah, this beautiful, beautiful home. I absolutely love this couch and the doors and the way that you've decorated it all. But also, yeah, I'm so blessed to know you and to and for our friendship really, and to continue deepening and to continue sharing of our traditions and of our hearts really, because I think that is, you know, when we learn how to turn towards one another and open our hearts and learn what stories you carry, what stories I carry, and that they're not threatening, you know, there's actually something that can be uniting there. That is such a that to me is the healing. So thank you.
It's an antidote to fear.
Exactly. Yeah.
It really is. I love you.
I love you too. And I think this is also, I love that. Sorry, now I'm like, now I need a whole other episode. Because it is true. There's so much about fear that needs to be dissected around, you know, because you can't just tell someone who's scared, like, oh, don't be scared.
No.
It's not going to work. You have to like, get with their experience around like why are they scared? What's happening in their bodies?
Yeah.
What's happening in the
Well, fear is defense. I mean, fear is like an innate like quality, quality and like response that actually is meant for survival. So it's not something to be suppressed, it's something to be addressed. So like
it's a good
don't
line.
suppress, address.
I love that. Address and also don't let it dominate your whole existence because there's always other voices. There's an intuitive voice, there's a joyful voice, there's a curiosity voice, you know? So it's like, how do we also not just focus on the fear that is there, but what are some of the other qualities that can help shed the light? Yeah, transmute that fear. Yeah. And that would be addressing it, right? It's like, how can you like change this feeling and the sensation into something else? And I think it is through these relationships. I mean, it really is like knowing more, learning more, being more open. And you're like, oh, okay, maybe I don't have as much to be afraid of. Yeah. As I thought. Yeah. Part two. Love it. We need these trauma therapists on here. Exactly. Well, thank you so much again. Such an honor and blessing to have you. I love you. Thank you for having me. I love you too, dear.